Dr. Anthony Fauci has been a household name for a long time, almost too much of a household name for a long time. And now he's in a little bit of hot water because we are finding that there were something like 3,200 emails that he was sending back and forth during the height of that pandemic last year. From January to June, 3,200 emails are now out and part of the public record. And these are emails that Dr. Fauci was sending back and forth between him and other medical professionals and other medical non-professionals, people like Mark Zuckerberg and many others. And so these emails have now come to light. Twitter has been going wild, dissecting all of them. You can understand that this is a very kind of a tense situation here, right? We're balancing a lot of interests. And so on this channel, we have spoken about giving people a little bit of a benefit of the doubt in these types of situations, right? We've talked about governors and other politicians and said, gosh, they were faced with a set of circumstances here that was unprecedented. I mean, the world has never seen anything quite like this. And so as we've been talking through COVID and coronavirus here for the last year or so, we've been doing our best to be cognizant of that, to recognize that there are a lot of people who are in a very, very difficult situation, technically doing their best, trying to, help America, the world, the country, presumably save lives. I am somebody who likes to default and naturally believe that people want to try to be productive, want to help their fellow person, their fellow man and woman, and move the needle in a positive direction. And so I sort of like to approach every story that way. And we're going to do that here with Dr. Fauci. There is a little bit of there's a sort of a sense of uneasiness when we go through this type of stuff because we're looking through somebody's emails, okay? And I know that I personally wouldn't want somebody to go through all of my emails and just throw them on the internet. And I would guess that most people would be in that same position. And so I have a little bit of empathy for this, right? This is a person that we want to be able to do business and communicate candidly without mincing words. And we want them to be able to do their job without having somebody look over their shoulders. And so when you go through somebody's emails, it kind of feels a little bit icky, doesn't it? But at the same time, he knew that these are all public record. He's a public official. This is part of the deal. If you get into government, most of your emails are public record, or any of the official ones should be. So, Dr. Fauci knows what he's getting into. And every time he sent one of those emails, he should have known that this was going to be public record. And that's kind of a rule that I have, right? If I'm sending any email from my business email account, I think to myself, what if a judge just laid that email out right in open court, or showed that to a client, or showed that to the state bar? I'm very cognizant of that. I'm also on a board here in the city of Scottsdale. So I actually do work and interface with the government. And I know that they have very strict rules about these open meeting laws. And, they have on the bottom of every email I get from the government, hey, be careful about what you do with this email and about where it goes and about even who you respond to. Don't click reply all because you might violate some of the open meeting rules and some of the open meeting laws. And that is on a low level, advisory committee that I'm on. I'm not running the national pandemic response team or anything like that. So, Dr. Fauci, I think, we want to afford him a modicum of humanity and decency and privacy, but at the same time, he's somebody who needs to be held accountable. He's been out there on TV a lot for the last year, scolding us and wagging his finger in our faces about what we should be doing and how we should be living our lives. And his commentary is not without consequence, okay? He's not out there sort of just spitballing. He's making decisions that have very long-lasting consequences that trickle down to everybody. And depending on what side of the aisle you're on, you might categorize the consequences differently, right? You might identify people who have been who died as a result of the coronavirus, or medical consequences, saying that had we listened to Fauci maybe more, maybe we would have saved more lives. Or maybe you're looking at it from the different perspective of saying, maybe this guy was just being dishonest with us. And we have a lot of suicides, alcohol deaths. We have a lot of businesses that aren't coming back. We have a lot of lives that are destroyed. We have children who basically lost a year of their time. And the list goes on and on. I mean, the consequences are severe. And so as a country, as a nation, I think it's absolutely appropriate for us to look backwards and say, hindsight affords us the opportunity to look back and make some adjustments, because everybody's telling us that there's another one coming, that this is just sort of preparation for the next future pandemic, and that we got to sort of get used to this. This was just one repetition that we're going to see more of. So I just want to be cognizant of this, that we are sort of asking our elected officials, the people that we put in power, to do a good job for us and to do the best. And with some of that, I think that there is a little bit of leeway and margins where we can give them a little benefit of the doubt. But at the same time, not too much doubt, okay? His performance needs to be measured. He is somebody who has been very unequivocal in a lot of his positions, and so we want to make sure that he gets a fair shake as we go through the data. But just because it's looking like we're coming out of the pandemic doesn't mean that now it's time for him to publish a book and do a book tour. We absolutely, as Americans, have the right to look back, to reflect on what we just went through and identify who is responsible for that. Because if somebody was responsible and this wasn't just some natural leak that just, manifested itself out of some bat out of a cave in Wuhan, well, we want to know about that so that we don't have to go through this garbage again. So I want to show you the tweet that sort of started it all off today for this segment. This is Jason Leopold. He's over at Buzzfeed. He says that Natalie Brett and I are joining WAPO's FOIA party, which is a Freedom of Information Act party, on Anthony Fauci's COVID-19 emails. But we're adding 2,400 more pages, and we're releasing all of the docs so everyone can read them. He posted this today. Covers January through June of 2020. And so 3,200 pages were there in total. It sounds like the Washington Post and some others, they had about 800 pages. BuzzFeed got another 2,400 pages and just said, it's all going on the internet. So I can tell you I've not read all 3,200 pages, but a lot of people have combed through it, and we're going to go through some of the highlights that I was able to pick out off of Twitter. Before we do, though, I want to explain why this is such an important topic, such an important concept. This is the diagram that we went through in a different video on the Wuhan video that I did on my second channel, where I walk you through all the different players in this kind of equation. And this is really based off of the article from Nicolas Wade. And you can see down here, we're talking about Dr. Fauci. Okay, Dr. Fauci is somebody who is obviously integral. He was the point person here in the United States for our coronavirus response. And he's also basically the head of these organizations, the NIH, the National Institute of Health, and the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And so, as we know, if we walk through the Nicolas Wade article, I'm going to summarize an hour and 20-minute video in a couple seconds here. But Fauci, of course, is the director of the NIAID, the NIH. They funded, through EcoHealth Alliance, which is run by Dr. Daszak, basically research that was being done by Dr. Shi, Dr. Bat Lady, from the NIAID. They issued a contract to EcoHealth. EcoHealth is run by Dr. Daszak. Dr. Daszak then funds Dr. Shi, Bat Lady, who's also affiliated with EcoHealth Alliance. And then she does her experimentation in China, in Wuhan, which, as we know, basically owns the World Health Organization. They went and did their investigation, and they were not able to find anything. In World Health, they got turned away. And now the World Health Organization is basically saying, maybe we should have been able to inquire further, and this prompting a sort of a second round of questions. And so you kind of see how this chain will just connect itself over to what's been going on. But that only explains the research. That only explains kind of the money and the contracts and all of that. There was also a lot of public relations that was happening early on in the pandemic. We were hearing this. We were saying, conspiracy theories, if you thought it came out of a lab, and the list goes on and on. We heard a lot of equivocation about masks and no masks, and then, this can stay on a surface for 30 days, and then suddenly not anymore. And, there was a lot of information darkness that was happening at that time. And so we had people at the forefront in the media every day talking about what we should be doing. And so it's sort of, you can call it public relations, you can call it propaganda if you want. I mean, it's really not far off from that. But who was doing that in the United States? Well, of course, it was Dr. Fauci. And Dr. Fauci then was communicating, as we're going to see, with a number of people in the media, right? And he was giving a ton of interviews. This one here is Dr. Daszak, who's giving an interview on this podcast. But Fauci was doing the same thing. He was making the rounds all over the place. And he was also sending emails with people like Dr. Daszak and discussing articles that were published in organizations like The Lancet. The Lancet is one of the articles that Nicolas Wade talks about that was part of this public relations push, this propaganda campaign. And I took a screenshot here from the article itself that you'll notice. And this was written by Dr. Daszak, who I think we're going to see one of his emails here shortly, but I just want to give you some background on this quickly. This section here is from Dr. Wade's article, and he's pointing out that back on February 19th, 2020, we have Dr. Daszak here, who is the author you can see listed here, he joins these other professionals, these medical professionals, and they draft this statement in support of the scientists, the public health professionals, and the medical professionals of China combating COVID-19. So this gets published February 19th, very early on in the pandemic, and you can see underlined here, it says, "We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin," right? And then the rest of this is just a big puff piece. Hey, China, we love you so much. We're going to help you with everything, whatever. And that's one of the initial articles that comes out February 19th that has all of these heavy hitter medical doctors behind it. Dr. Daszak, we got Charles Kalischer, Dennis Carroll, Rita Colwell, whatever. All of these people now joining hands and saying, this was a natural virus. And we stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting otherwise. When in the article, this article went out and it lit the fire, right? It was the spark that set the media off. They ran with this because this was their science that they could pin their hat on. Say, oh no, look, Dr. Daszak and all these other medical doctors, these people who are the scientists, you really know what they're talking about. They would never, come up with some sort of propaganda article to cover their traces because they were the ones that were actually doing the gain of function research on the Wuhan Institute Lab of Virology taking place in China. That would never happen. So we're just going to follow and take their word for it that anything that is suggesting that this was maybe man-made is a conspiracy theory. So this article went out from The Lancet. Then we also have another article that comes out here from Christian Anderson. Okay, this is another doctor. This was published March 17th. Okay, just a couple weeks later, the proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2. This is Dr. Anderson, and we're going to hear his response to this email kerfuffle because he posted a response on Twitter. Here's from his article that's backing up the Lancet article. It says, to the editor, since the first reports of the coronavirus, there has been considerable discussion on the origin of the virus. Cases have been confirmed all over the place. And then he goes through, he says, well, we've known this is the 7th coronavirus, blah, blah, blah. We offer a perspective on the notable features. Our analysis clearly show that this is not a laboratory construct or a purposefully manipulated virus, right? So we've got some background now. We've got 2 stories from the Nicolas Wade article. I go into a lot more detail on that entire story in the separate video, link down below. But we've got 2 stories now that are fleshing out the public relations aspect of this entire campaign. We've got the science, we've got, of course, the technical transmission of the virus and where it was being conducted in the lab and what the mode of transmission is and all of that stuff. But we're also talking about the public relations campaign. And we've got these 2 doctors communicating with Dr. Fauci about this, all saying and telling us that the science is unequivocal. Absolutely did not come from a lab, which is kind of interesting because science is supposed to be, sort of come up with a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis, and then you come to a conclusion. And we're going to hear that, well, it sounds like maybe they were jumping the gun a little bit. Maybe they really didn't know what the hell they were talking about. So let's start by going to Buzzfeed. As we know, Jason Leopold on Twitter, we can see him listed here on the byline. He's a Buzzfeed news reporter, and he's being joined by Natalie Bettendorf here. This was posted yesterday, June 1, 1:59 p.m. It says Fauci's emails revealed the pressure that fell on one man. So, right. So that's I would say a pleasant headline for Fauci, right? The pressure that fell on the one man. Oh my gosh, so much pressure. And you start thinking, well, that's kind of his job, right? I mean, this was the guy who was the head of the NIAID, head of NIH, has been doing this for the last 50 years. This is his entire career. And when I saw him on the media, I didn't see him sweating, uncontrollably. He kind of liked it. He was out there just kind of shoving himself in front of the cameras at every opportunity. And many of us were saying, what is he doing? What is he talking about every day? What do we need to hear from him for every day? But Buzzfeed says that was a lot of pressure, which I don't doubt. Look, anybody in a position like this is obviously facing a lot of pressure. The entire country was facing a lot of pressure. So Fauci, I'm sure, is not immune from that. The woman's email arrived in Fauci's inbox, February 28th, the story starts, with a one-word subject line, urgent. Coronavirus crisis was still in its early stages. Fauci, the U.S. government's top infectious disease scientist, was already under tremendous pressure, both because of the health threat facing the country and the political climate fostered by the Trump administration. So, all right, so we're going to start by blaming Trump. I understand Vice President Pence has ordered you to not inform the public about the coronavirus without approval. That is quite terrifying, especially since Trump has already shown his desire to spread false and incomplete information about this public health crisis, the woman wrote, which is, so this is some email that Fauci got, but right, false or incomplete information. It sounds like nobody had any information. She had tracked down Fauci's email, which is not easily accessible on government websites. She says, I'm planning to fly domestically tomorrow. Is it safe? Of course, Fauci had urgent matters to attend to. He replied back to the stranger anyway. He said, there's much information. I actually have not been muzzled at all by the vice president. And by the way, it is safe to fly domestically. There you go. More than 3,200 pages of emails obtained through the FOIA Freedom of Information Act lawsuit that was filed by Buzzfeed covered a period from January to June last year. Rare glimpse into Fauci's approach, showing him dealing directly with the public, health officials, reporters, and even celebrities. Washington Post received 800 more pages of email and published a story about them. Emails reviewed by Buzzfeed reveal him sparring with an antiviral drug over an antiviral drug with somebody named Ezekiel Emanuel, former Obama health official. He was taking questions about vaccines. He got an update from Zuckerberg, which we're going to look at, about a Facebook information hub. Zuckerberg also asked whether the social media company could provide resources to accelerate vaccine testing. Fauci even responded to an offer from an actor, Morgan Fairchild, to use her Twitter account on his behalf. Okay, so a lot of people are reaching out, and I think that's a beautiful thing about America. Whenever there's a problem, people just sort of jump into action, spring into action. I remember when I was a kid, the first time that I really sort of recognized this, I forget what year this was, but it was back when there was that massive tsunami in India. And I think there was the way that the United States responded at that time, I forget who was in charge or how it happened. I don't even think it had anything to do with the government at all. There was sort of this beautiful jumping into action from, I think, the American people. There was some website that raised, like $100 million like overnight or something like that. I forget what the details were, but this is what I'm talking. This is a good thing when there's something that we need to solve. We just, all right, let's go do it, right? And this has sort of been a tradition that we've had in America for a long time. Back during World War II, Japanese come, sink a bunch of ships in Pearl Harbor. Guess what? Is America down for the count? No. We just go down, we patch them up, float them back up, send them over to Japan, and take care of business over there, right? That's just sort of the nature of how we do things. So we're going to hear from Zuckerberg right here, who's jumping in, trying to lend a hand. Let's see what he has to say. It says, Tony, we can see here from Mark Zuckerberg, and you're going to notice these redactions, B6, and we're going to see B4 down here. These are just FOIA redactions. It's to protect confidentiality. So this was sent Sunday, March 15th to Anthony Fauci. Says, subject, thanks and ideas. Tony, this is coming from Zuckerberg. You can see down here, Mark, I wanted to send a note of thanks for your leadership and everything you're doing. Also wanted to share a few ideas. I understand you're busy. Don't need a reply. This isn't public yet, but we're building a coronavirus information hub. We're going to put it at the top of Facebook for everyone, like 200 plus million Americans, 2.5 billion people worldwide, with two goals. One, to make sure people can get authoritative information from reliable sources, which I guess they're counting on Fauci for. And number two, to encourage people to practice social distance and give people ideas for using internet tools. This will be live within the next 48 hours. Part of this hub, I think it'd be useful to include a video from you. It could be done in a number of ways if you're open to it. I'm also doing a series of live streams. You can jump in on those as well. Finally, and then we have this big redaction. Now, this redaction here probably has to do with the vaccine testing that the article in BuzzFeed mentioned here. They're talking about accelerate vaccine testing here. So, we can't see what that is, but maybe that's what they're talking about. He says, I know you're busy. Here's my cell phone number if you need anything. So here is he's responding back. So from Fauci over to Courtney Billette says, per the email below, from Billette to Fauci, we have, per the email below, Mark has extended a few offers. We should definitely look into these, he says, but an even bigger deal is his offer to whatever this is. The sooner we get that offer up the food chain, the better. I gave Bill Hall a heads up about this opportunity. He's standing by to discuss. I didn't want him to do anything without you being aware. Is it okay if I hand this aspect off to Bill to determine who the best point of contact would be so the administration could take advantage of this offer soon? So this must be the vaccine suggestion, about helping to speed that up here. So, right, that's great. Mark Zuckerberg, he is doing what he can. I will write to or call Mark, tell him I'm interested in doing this. I'll tell him you're going to get the USG point of contact. I agree. It should be Bill Hall. All right. So, that's sort of kind of vanilla stuff. And you can have a lot of criticisms about Mark Zuckerberg. I certainly do, of course, but nothing in there that sounds nefarious or evil or like like intentional manipulation. Okay. And look, you can say what you want about Mark Zuckerberg. He said, I want reliable information. He leans on Fauci, which the government said is as reliable as we can get. So where else is he supposed to go? Nothing really, I think, to even raise any eyebrows in that email. Let's take a look at what's going on here. Here's another one. We've got Fauci says, we've got an email from Morgan Fairchild, February 26, Wednesday. Hey, Dr. Fauci, I'm reaching out to see if I can help in any way get information out to the public as I try to do with AIDS. I have almost 100,000 followers. I've been tweeting articles to them. If you have any info I can disseminate, let me know. I'll help. Thanks for the note. It'd be great if you could tweet to your many Twitter followers that although the current risk of coronavirus to the American public is low, the fact that there is community spread in places like China, Italy poses a great threat. It occurs that many more cases could come properly isolated, right? Nothing really even significant there. Be aware that behavioral adjustments may need to be made if a pandemic occurs, right? So, okay. So if somebody writes in, hey, I've got 100,000 followers, he responds, yeah, just tell them, stay calm. We got it under control, social distancing, teleworking, prepare yourself because there may be changes coming. So the rest of this article from Buzzfeed says the emails show that Fauci received a flurry of correspondence. One such email said that the director of National Institute of Health was under the subject line, conspiracy gains momentum. It contained a link to a news story that said Fox News said that the allegation of the lab escape had a merit. Records also lay bare Fauci's ambivalence towards his newfound celebrity status, but also his embrace of a documentary crew who would tell his story. So he had a documentary crew following him around for the entire pandemic. Isn't that nice? Additionally, the emails hint at the personal toll this past year has taken on him. In one email, when COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic, he wrote that he had only been able to see his wife for 45 minutes in the past 10 days. Fauci, who's been the director of National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases since 1984, has declined to comment for this story. So, one of the responses has been, hey, lay off Fauci, okay? He did his best. Since 1984, he's been in this position. He's been preparing for longer than I've been alive, actually, for this. This is what he's been doing for 36 years. So he should be prepared, right? He should be ready to go and rock and roll on this stuff. And it actually looks like thus far in this segment that he knew what he was doing. Now, let's take a look over at the Washington Examiner. Key figure in the Wuhan research thanked Fauci for downplaying the lab leak hypothesis. Do you notice a difference in the headlines there? Do you notice how BuzzFeed kind of communicated their headlines? The intense toll, the pressure of the pandemic, all of the weight of the world down on Fauci's shoulders. We're just trying to empathize with the man who was just sending emails back to people who were concerned. I have followers. Oh, sure. Tell your followers. Hey, it's Mark Zuckerberg. Hey, Mark, just thanks for the help. We're doing what we can. Then we take a look at the other side. Thanked Fauci for downplaying the lab leak hypothesis. So it's a different tone. Let's see what this article says. This was written by Sarah Westwood over at Washington Examiner. A key figure in the coronavirus research at Wuhan lab personally thanked Dr. Fauci for downplaying the likelihood that COVID-19 originated in a lab. Even though the possibility remains more than a year later and it's under investigation. Who are we talking about? I already talked to you about him. His name is Dr. Peter Daszak. He's the president of EcoHealth Alliance. He's the research group that secured a grant to perform coronavirus research in Wuhan before the pandemic. He wrote to Fauci in April of last year to, quote, to say a personal thank you on behalf of our staff and our collaborators after Fauci dismissed the idea that the pandemic started in a lab. Fauci replied to the email, which came April 18th, to thank Daszak for his kind note. Earlier in the day, Fauci was asked directly about the lab leak hypothesis during a coronavirus briefing. And he said the scientific evidence is totally consistent with the jump of a species from an animal to a human, right? That happened on April 18, 2020. So he says the science is consistent. It's totally consistent, right? And so he uses that language a lot. It's very sort of waffly language. It's consistent. Well, the current science is consistent with a natural origin of the coronavirus. Well, guess what happened? 6 months fast forward. Oh, we've got new evidence. And so now my new science is that it's consistent that maybe this did come from a lab, right? It's that language. It gives him a lot of wiggle room to move around and have a lot of flexibility, which of course he is now using. So the article continues. The exchange between Daszak and Fauci was part more of a 3,200 trove of documents that was posted online. Fauci has publicly since shifted his tone. Says acknowledging in recent days that the virus may indeed have come from a lab. Wow, what a change. Daszak's role in quietly steering public opinion away from the possibility of a lab leak has come under scrutiny amid a dramatic shift in the media coverage of the hypothesis. The media, yeah, because this all came about as a result of Nicolas Wade's article. That man really opened up a new conversation, which is just incredible. As the pandemic was just beginning, Daszak orchestrated a letter from several scientists that rejected the idea of a lab. I just showed you that letter right at the beginning of the show if you missed it. He did not disclose his conflict of interest when signing the letter. Just signed it, okay? And didn't sign this letter saying that the virus did not come from a lab, along with a number of other doctors. Showed you the title page of that article. Didn't disclose that his company, EcoHealth Alliance, had gotten a contract from the NIH to do gain-of-function research in Wuhan. Didn't disclose that at all. Didn't say, hey, look, we did our science here, and we know that this did not come from a lab. By the way, just so you don't think there's any shady business going on, I actually do work in that lab. Okay, I got a contract from the federal government. We're doing all sorts of crazy crap in there. But we checked. We had nothing to do with this. Okay. And you look at whatever you want. Go find the bats from the caves down in China. That's where they came from. That was not the conversation. The conversation was, we've done the science, nothing to see here. Not mentioning any of that other important data. Lying by omission. President Joe Biden, let's back up. The letter here ultimately informed a significant amount of media coverage of the lab leak theory. Yeah, President Joe Biden has said that he has ordered his intelligence community to probe the origins of COVID-19 and report back in 90 days, only after people started to raise their eyebrows about this. Recall that as soon as he went into office, they shut down the Trump investigation that was already underway. Secretary of State Pompeo under the Trump administration came out with a fact sheet, I think it was on January 15th, detailing what they had found thus far because they knew that they were on the way out the door and Biden was coming in. Biden comes in, says, what were you guys looking into over there in Wuhan? Oh, Wuhan? No, we're shutting down that investigation. Then Nicolas Wade comes out, posts an article, implicates Dr. Fauci, Dr. Daszak, we got Dr. Christensen Anderson, and the list goes on from Bat Lady in Wuhan and beyond that. Now Biden comes out and says, oh, I'm going to need a report on all that over there, Mr. or Mrs. Intelligence Community. Go take a look into that, will you? Last week, EcoHealth Alliance told the Washington Examiner it had received no request from information from the Biden administration. Previously, Daszak publicly resisted requests for information about EcoHealth's activities at the Wuhan lab from Fauci's agency, the National Institute of Health. Despite his position leading the research group that backed the coronavirus research at the epicenter of the pandemic, Daszak was tapped as a member of the World Health Organization's investigative team. And he was actually dispatched to look into the origins of COVID-19. So it's kind of like when I go off on the police investigating themselves. You know, they say, hey, Officer so-and-so did something wrong, so we're going to get Officer Smith to come here and investigate Officer Jones, and then Officer Smith's going to do a great job. He's going to work really hard, and he's not going to be biased or unethical. He's going to investigate Officer Johnson over here, and he's going to give us a full report about whether he broke the law or not. And we're going to do all of this behind closed doors, and if you need any information about it, we're not going to give it to you. Then Officer Smith or whatever the first one's name was, he comes back out, did nothing wrong. We all go, oh, that's great. That's good. So just put him back out there on the force and we'll just leave things be. Same thing happening here. We have Dr. Daszak. We have somebody diving deeply into all of this gain of function research. Somebody who's been doing it for a long time, had official contracts with the NIH through the NIAID, worked with Fauci, sending emails back and forth to Fauci. He writes an article saying, I know that you have some questions about the origin of the virus. Didn't come from my lab. Okay, here's the article. Media runs wild with it, published in the Lancet. Then the World Health Organization comes in and says, hey, we got some questions about that. We want to go take a look. Is there anybody out there that can help us go investigate what's happening here about the origin of the virus? Dr. Daszak's back in the corner. He's raising his hand. I can help. Yeah, bring me over there. Take me back to the lab. I'll show you around. I'll show you whatever you want to know. I'll give you all the information I have. Because he wants to be in the investigation. And guess what? He investigates himself and finds nothing wrong there, folks. Nothing there at all. The joint World Health Organization China team report, they ultimately faced widespread skepticism, including from the Biden administration themselves, because it drew strong conclusions about the start of the pandemic based on very little evidence. Chinese authorities did not fully cooperate with the investigation. Daszak then admitted during a 60 Minutes interview in March that he and the rest of the World Health Organization team had taken Chinese officials at their word during the investigation. So it wasn't even an investigation. This guy is so reprehensible. It's just sickening. Let's take a look and see what Nicolas Wade has to say here. This is him. He's being, this is from their, an interview on the Washington Examiner.
Is there equally compelling evidence at this point to support the natural origin theory?
I think the way to look at it is to say, first, we have two plausible scenarios on the table, natural emergence and lab leak. And the second thing to say is there's no direct evidence for either. We don't have any direct proof that either occurred. So all we can do is look at the available evidence and ask which scenario explains the evidence better. And in my article, I argued that lab escape provides much easier, more plausible explanations for the data that we have so far than natural emergence does.
So what he's saying here, and I think this is a very important point that is kind of easy to gloss over. He's saying that when they went and they did the investigation in China, that the Chinese said, look around. It did not come from the lab. Okay. And you might be able to actually look around and come to that conclusion because they cleaned it all up, right? They swept everything. There's nothing to find there. And everything has been covered up by the Chinese. If you suspect that maybe the lab escape theory is plausible, let's sort of jump off there. So we go and we investigate it. And the Chinese say, hey, there is nothing here, right? So either way you want to go with this, let's say that they're being dishonest. There's nothing here. They cleaned house. Okay, that's fine. We're going to investigate. We're going to continue our investigation. Thanks for letting us take a look around. Or let's say that the Chinese are being, in fact, honest, that the virus did, in fact, not come from this lab. So the Chinese say, come on in and look around. So Dr. Daszak, Dr. Fauci, World Health, everybody goes through, they look around the lab and they say, you're right, we don't see anything here. There's nothing here. Thank you for all the information. Thanks for showing us. First of all, it sounds like it didn't even go that far. They just kind of showed up. The Chinese walked out and said, hey, we did our investigation. Here's what you can have, World Health Organization. You're not looking at anything. Turn around and walk away. And they did. So it never even got that far, but I digress. Let's say that they actually did walk around the lab. They couldn't find anything. Is that the end of the story? Oh, it didn't come from a lab. Do you just stop your inquiry there? Well, no, Nicolas Wade is saying. He's saying, okay, so we have ruled out that possibility that it originated from a lab, according to the Chinese, according to people with all these conflicts of interest, like Dr. Daszak and Dr. Fauci and Dr. Anderson and Dr. She Bat Lady and the World Health Organization and the Chinese. Everybody's got a conflict. So do we take their word for it and just trust them on this, or and just say, oh, well, it didn't come from the lab, so that means we don't need to investigate any other natural theories? If the Chinese want us to believe that it didn't come from a lab and it came from a cave in China, well, where's the evidence for that? It's their country. They've got jurisdiction over it, so they should be able to connect the dots. If it didn't emanate from a lab, then where did it come from? Did it come from a bat? And if so, who was the intermediary host, or what was the intermediary host that was able to make it jump from a bat to the intermediary host into a human? Okay. And the Wade article and the video that I did on that goes into that in depth. It's a complicated process, but he actually breaks it down very nicely. So if you're going to go and investigate the lab escape theory and they rule that out, that's not possible that it came from there, they should be giving us an alternative explanation. If it's not the lab, where then? Where did it come from? They have not done that. And there's been no evidence to support that as the article goes on. So go watch that video or read that article. It's well worth it. Trust me, it's very good. There is so much information and it just shows you what a public relations campaign we have all been through. All right, so let's get back to the emails. We're going to go to Dr. Fauci's emails. We're going to comb through these. I have a lot of them, but we're not going to spend a ton of time on each one. I just want to show you what's going on here. So Sarah Westwood, who we just heard from speaking to Dr. Nicolas Wade, says that Peter Daszak, who is deeply involved in the Wuhan research and in misleading the public about the likelihood of a lab leak, thanked Fauci for helping him dispel the myths. So this is that email that we were talking about previously. Here is to Peter Daszak. This is coming from Dr. Fauci. He says, many thanks for your kind note. What's he talking about? Well, previously, Saturday, April 18th, we have Peter Daszak now, the doctor, sending an email to Tony. Tony, CCing David, so you might pass this on to Tony. He says, as the PI of the R01 grant publicly targeted by Fox News reporters at the presidential press briefing, I just wanted to say a personal thank you on behalf of our staff and collaborators for publicly standing up and stating that the scientific evidence supports a natural origin for COVID-19 from a bat to human spillover, not a lab release, from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. All the rest of this has been blanked out, as you can see. He says, from my perspective, your comments are brave. Yeah, they are brave, aren't they? Coming from your trusted voice will help dispel the myths being spun around the virus's origins. So, of course, he didn't put a disclaimer in there saying, oh, I work at that lab. But he doesn't need to, because Dr. Fauci already knows that. Dr. Fauci knows, well, I'm the head of the NIH, the NIAID. I remember signing off on that grant that went to Dr. Daszak, that went to the EcoHealth Alliance, that was funding gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Shoot, So Fauci knows that he can't say anything. He doesn't respond and say, yeah, you're right. He doesn't say, oh, no problem at all. Anybody contesting the opposite obviously is misinformed. He doesn't say anything like that. He doesn't respond to this at all because he knows he can't, because he's going, oh, shoot, I can't believe he sent me that email, damn it. So he just says, many thanks for your kind note, because he can't say anything because he knows that there's a massive conflict of interest, and this is all public record, part of his public emails. We have another one here. This is coming from the other doctor. So we mentioned him previously, Christian G. Anderson. So he wrote that second article saying that it was naturally occurring. This was posted earlier, sent earlier, February 1st. And Fauci sends back, says, thanks, Christian. Talk soon on the call. Don't put it in writing. So he says down here on Friday, January 31st. This is, look, folks, this is before we have the National Declaration of Emergency or anything like that. And it says, this just came out today. You may have seen it. If not, it is of interest to the current discussion. Christian says, hey, Tony, thanks for sharing. Yes, I saw this earlier, and it looks like mining the coronavirus genomes for clues to the outbreak's origin is the subject here. So there's some science. They're passing an article around from Greg Folkers over to somebody. And here's what they're talking about. It's a great article, but the problem is that our phylogenetic analyses aren't able to answer whether the sequences are unusual at the individual residues, except if they are completely off. We have got some more science talk here. And he says the unusual feature of the virus make up a really small part of the genome, less than 0.1%. So one has to look really closely at all the sequences to see that some of the features potentially look engineered. So they're talking about potential engineering on the genome of the virus itself. All right, he says we have a good team lined up to look very critically at this, so we should know much more by the end of the weekend. I should mention that after discussions today with some other people, we all find the genome inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory. All right, the genome is inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory. But we have to look at this much more closely. There's still further analyses to be done, so those opinions could still change. Now, I am not an evolutionary biologist or anything like that, but if a genome is inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory, to me that means, sounds like somebody got in there and was manipulating some things. Evolutionary theory, to me, would mean that something evolved naturally. It's evolution. And what they are seeing in the genome is inconsistent with what they expect to see on a naturally evolving virus on February 1st, 2020. We have another email. This one is coming over from Ian Miles Chung here. Says, China played Fauci like a fiddle. This was sent Monday, March 16th. Great advice from a Chinese expert. So we have Michael Liu here, sends this over to Fauci. He says, Dear Dr. Fauci, Dr. Wenhong Zheng, very famous in China. Dr. Zhang is the director of the infectious disease department in Shanghai. Very good. According to Dr. Zhang's video, so he sends him some Chinese propaganda, COVID-19 can be prevented with 3 measures: social distancing, wash your hands frequently, and wear masks. All right. Strongly suggest the American people do this, which is basically what Fauci did. Maybe he took this and ran with it. I think we were doing that before March 16th, though. Dr. Zhang said, if a person is still infected, he or she takes 3 above measures plus concentrated isolation. He says, I strongly suggest that the American government should learn precious experience from mainland China, Taiwan, South Korea with an open mind. If you need any help, contact us. I'm confident the U.S. government will lead the American people through this. Science, expertise, and great learning are the best medicines. God bless you. God bless America, China, and the whole world. Best regards. All right, so again, not much here, right? This is somebody sending an email to him, an email into Dr. Fauci. Okay, he probably got a lot of emails. He's not responsible for those. And we have another one. He says, Michael, thank you for your note. We indeed have learned much from our Chinese colleagues, except the origin of the virus, apparently. I appreciate your bringing these issues to our attention. And again, best regards. Okay, so diplomatic, not much consequential. Let's see what else we have here. We have this came over from Justin Hart on Twitter. He said, here come the smoking guns. On February 1, Fauci exchanged emails with Hugh Auchincloss, a big cheese at the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Says, I'm still trying to thread through these, but here are a series of emails with the subject line, important. The real subject, gain of function research. And so, as we know, right, this is an unfolding story. This is a breaking story. There are 3,200 pages. They are just being released today and late yesterday. So people are going to be combing through them and assembling them as this individual, Justin Hart, is doing. So give him a follow if you want to follow his work. It sounds like he is going deep on this stuff. So we've got an email that he uncovered for us today. It says here from Anthony Fauci, sent February 1st, 2020, sent over to Hugh Auchincloss. Important. We're talking about, we got an attachment here, Nature Medicine, SARS Gain of Function PDF. What is that? It says, Hugh, it is essential we speak this morning. Keep your cell phone on. I have a conference call at 7:45 a.m. with Azar. It will likely be over at 8:45. Read this paper as well as the email that I will forward to you now. You will have tasks that must be done today. Dr. Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the NIAID, sends this email over to this gentleman who's also over there. So he sends the email. Looks like here it is, right? We got this. So whatever this article, Barrick, Shi et al., Nature Medicine, SARS, Gain of Function Research. Then looks like he responds, okay. Or this is from Fauci to him. He says Hugh Auchincloss responds, says, the paper you sent me says the experiments were performed before the gain of function pause, but have since been reviewed and approved by the NIH. Not sure what that means, since Emily is sure that no coronavirus work has gone through the P3 framework. She will try to determine if we have any distant ties to this work abroad. So that read to me like Fauci goes, oh, shoot. He sends, it's essential we speak this morning. Keep your cell phone on, damn it. I have a conference call at 7:45. It's going to be over at 8:45. Read this and the email. We're going to talk about it. What is it about? It's about gain of function. And it sounds like it's been performed and maybe even approved and reviewed by the NIH. Okay, right here, by the NIH. No wonder Fauci wants to talk about that. Kind of a problem if his organization is funding gain of function research, isn't it? No wonder he wants to talk to somebody about it. Here is a little bit more about what's going on here. We have, as per my prior email, here is, looks like some of the article. Let's hear. Mining coronavirus genomes for clues to the outbreak's origin. Another email from Greg Falkers, January 31st. Part of a long-running effort to see what viruses bats harbor, researchers collect one from a cave in Guangdong. We have, looks like here, snippets from a DNA sequence. Pathogen dubbed the 2019 coronavirus. That is the overwhelming China and frightening the entire world. Scientists are publicly sharing an ever-growing of full sequences. So it looks like, yeah, so they're actually going and pulling viruses out of bats, I think is what that article says. We have here, we have a bioweapon production method that has been identified by Cultural Husbandry over here at this address on Twitter. Wednesday, March 11, 2020, posts to the NIAID public inquiries, coronavirus bioweapon production method. Right now, I've talked about this a lot, and I've said this before on this channel, that the governmental response, the nation state response from not only the United States, but around the world felt more like a military response than it did a health crisis. We've been through many health crises before. We've talked about the bird flu and swine flu and Ebola, and the list goes on and on. There's a million of them that we've had in my lifetime. And we've seen how they respond to that. They just send over some people in some rubber suits and they clean it up. And it sort of is this slow boil for a certain period of time until it fades its way out. This time, though, was different. Before this even became something that, in my opinion, warranted the cannonball explosion nuclear response that our government had shoved down our throats, we didn't know much about this. And so my initial thought was, why are they responding this way? We see how they respond to normal health crises. It's not that big of a deal because those are natural health crises. This is something entirely different. This is something that feels like it warrants a bigger response from our government, which is why they responded the way they did. We're sitting here as Americans going, oh, I guess it's just a natural virus. It's strange, though, to us because we've seen how they respond to other natural viruses, and this feels a little bit differently. Maybe this is not what they say it is. Turns out maybe that's true. We have an email here from Adam Gardner, March 11th. He sends an email. He says to Fauci, this is how the virus was created. Now, again, who is this guy? Adam Gardner, no idea who that person is. Okay. And so how is Fauci responsible for any of this? I don't know. Interviron fusion. It was mixed with 1,000 nanograms of HIV particles incorporating the envelope, SARS-CoV protein, both envelopes, PBS at 4 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes to allow the binding. So it's like baking a cake. It's a recipe. Samples were raised to 37 degrees Celsius for 15 minutes to allow for conformational rearrangements. The virons were adjusted to the desired pH of 0.1 m citric acid. If you go higher than 0.1 moles of citric acid, it's going to be a very bad tasting virus. So we have TPCK trypsin final concentration, and you see what's going on here. The cells were spin infected and incubated at 37 degrees for 5 hours. Once you 5 hours, 37 degrees, that is going to be a delicious coronavirus. So somebody sent that over to Dr. Fauci, and who knows what he did with that. But again, to defend Fauci here a little bit, people send emails all the time. I get emails all the time from people that I will skim through. Some of them I actually read. Some of them I read the first couple paragraphs and I know where this is going, and I don't necessarily need to read the rest of it. So, for a public figure like Fauci, I'm going to guess that he gets a lot more emails than I do, probably, and doesn't have the opportunity to respond to all of them. So is this the smoking gun that Fauci, manufactured this virus? Not that I can tell, unless we know more about this Adam Gardner person. Who is that person? I don't know. All right, next up, we've got features that potentially look engineered. A genome inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory. We already read this one. So this is coming from Dr. Anderson, Saturday, February 1st, 2020. Thanks, Christian. Talk soon on the call. Flag this one more time. He says, we have to look at this much more closely. There are still further analyses to be done, but the genome is inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory. And so I think the important point on this is that this was said on Saturday, February 1st, 2020, right? We don't really know yet. It's not consistent with evolutionary theory. Well, for the rest of the year, we heard that anybody who was talking about a lab escape theory was a conspiracy theorist and a whack job. And we saw people, fighting each other in the streets over the coronavirus stuff. It was crazy. But sounds like the science wasn't exactly settled quite yet. Still have a little bit of disagreement on evolutionary theory and whether the genome is consistent with it or not. Next up, we've got Justin Hart's saying here that Fauci knew about the aerosol transmission in February of last year, and yet it was all masks a go-go for 15 months, right? We have an email from Robert Geller. Says, Tony, thanks for everything you were saying and doing. I am writing to ask for the latest. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob. What about general care of a patient suspected or confirmed COVID-19, N95 or surgical mask? Any news on how this disease is being transmitted? Anything new on vaccine or treatment? February 26, 2020. He says, Bob, thanks for the note. Hope all is well with you. Use an N95 if you have them available. Transmission is similar to influenza. Respiratory droplets, and likely a bit more as aerosol than with influenza. People can transmit even when they are asymptomatic. No approved therapies, however. We are doing clinical trials on repurposed drugs such as remdesivir. Vaccine going into phase 1 trial in 6 weeks will not be ready for at least 1.5 years. All right, so I was wrong on that because we got vaccines by the end of the year last year. I think even right around the election time is when the first one started rolling out. All right, so kind of wrong on a lot of things there. But, telling us about transmission. Here's another one. Said many times, this is from Christian Anderson, the doctor that we spoke about briefly. Okay, and he wrote this email, the evolutionary theory email. So he said, as I've said many times, we seriously considered a lab leak a possibility. However, significant new data, extensive analyses, and many discussions led to the conclusions in our paper. What the email shows is a clear example of the scientific process. And so, you're going to hear a lot of people about this, talking about this, like, I heard Fauci. Fauci gave an interview to some softball interview that was absolutely boring today. And he said something like, well, science is dynamic and science changes and we have to sort of adjust with the science. And I'm going, that's kind of not really what I thought. I thought it was, theoretical and, you can do science. And part of the scientific method is coming up with a theory and then testing the theory and then coming up with a conclusion. I mean, has that changed since like 5th grade or whenever the hell we learned what the scientific method was? The scientific method wasn't you go out and you come up with a conclusion that you think is right. And then you go and you do a bunch of science and try to, work your way back into your conclusion. That was not what I thought the process was. It was about, hey, we have a couple different hypotheses. This could be transmitted through aerosol. This could be transmitted just through surfaces. This could be something that stays alive on surfaces for 1 day or 3 days or 7 days or 9 days or 30 days. We don't know. So we're going to test them all. We're going to come up with a hypothesis. We're going to say probably 7 days because we've got other viruses that we can compare it to and, do analysis on that. Come up with a hypothesis. Perform some experiments, come to a conclusion, and then we've got an answer on that. More or less, I know it's more complicated than that, but the point here being, we didn't hear that from Fauci or from anybody. We heard a lot of conclusions, a lot of definitives, a lot of don't wear a mask first, right? We heard that for months. Don't wear a mask. Then suddenly wear a mask. This can live on surfaces for 30 days. Then suddenly not so much anymore. Then, you lose immunity if you've already had COVID immediately. Now you might be having it for a lot longer. No vaccines for 1.5 years in March 2020. Well, here we got them. We got them by the end of the year in like 9 months. Operation Warp Speed. So that sounds more like science than just raw speculation. So I don't know what this doctor is talking about here. A clear example of the scientific process. You have sort of a half-baked conclusion. Actually, to be fair, this guy's doing science here. This actually looks more like science, okay? He's doing an analysis and he says, those opinions could change. We don't really know. We don't actually have a conclusion. Dr. Fauci comes out then and Dr. Lancet comes out, or Dr. Daszak, who's a part of Dr. Lancet, and they come out and they call them conspiracy theories. It's not appropriate. They're not conspiracy theories. Science hasn't proven it one way or the other. The Chinese have not given us any information one way or the other. They say it didn't come from the lab, but they're not telling us that they got information about where it did in fact come from then. If you didn't do it, who did? No idea. No information there. So, the big winner in all of this really, Rand Paul, he posted on Twitter today, told you, fire Fauci, right? This guy has been on Fauci for a long time. Rightfully so. Do you know why? Because he's a doctor. Because he also understands the risks and how this stuff works. So you've got an actual doctor versus a doctor like Dr. Fauci, who is essentially a politician in a doctor's coat, wandering around saying whatever is politically expedient at that particular time, not based on the science, acting as cover for some of the more nefarious stuff. And at least we don't know if it's nefarious yet, but at least the conflict of interest. Not acknowledging that and not communicating appropriately to the American people about the real threat. If he wanted compliance from Americans, what would have caused more compliance than Dr. Fauci coming out there and saying, hey, folks, this thing might have come from a Chinese virology lab. This might be a weaponized virus. Do you think that anybody out there in America who is scratching their head saying this COVID thing feels like a whole scam or whatever? Many people were saying that out there in America. And we know that that's not the case, right? People are dropping dead all over the country. But something felt off. People felt like something was dishonest, like the government was not telling us something. We all knew it because the response didn't match our prior experiences. And now we know there's more to the story. And if Fauci or Trump, who's, one level above him, if they would have come out and told us with their intelligence that, hey, maybe this thing came from literally, this could be a bioweapon from China. Oh my gosh. Talk about compliance. Talk about mass compliance. Talk about social distancing. Okay. the entire country, I think, would have responded differently to that statement. And I'm not so sure in a bad way either. I'm not so sure that people would freak out about that and start, killing each other or rioting in the streets. I think, like we said at the start of the show, I think that people would probably have said, oh, okay, well, we're going to knock this thing out quickly, and we're going to make sure that we decouple from China and that this doesn't ever happen again. And we would have come out stronger. But now what we've got is sort of this band-aided, this half-assed investigation that may not show us anything. And the people really responsible for it may never pay the consequences. We'll see. Biden, though, is asking some questions. I think this is a little bit too late, but we'll see. This was posted by Libby Cathy. So he announced this back on May 26th. We're going to skim through this quickly. It says that Biden orders the U.S. intel to further probe the origins of COVID, raises questions for China. So he said that he's going to, redouble their efforts to investigate and has specific questions for China, whatever. Biden's directive is a significant change in how the White House is dealing with the theory that the virus might have originated from Wuhan, one elevated last year by President Trump and Mike Pompeo and other hawkish Republicans. Biden administration had until now said the World Health Organization should lead a more intensive investigation and put pressure on China. So today, all right, so we've got all that story. Trump says, I'm right. Biden sides with China, World Health Organization, and the liberal media on Wuhan virus. Pompeo tweeted, this isn't political. America must lead on this. So we're going to start asking some questions. We'll see if anything comes of it. China's not happy about this. China said, oh, you want to investigate our country? How about we just turn the planet into a nuclear oblivion? What do you think about that? China state media says the country must prepare for nuclear war with the U.S. after Biden asked for a COVID probe. All right, it's coming over from Newsweek. We have Hu Jing, the editor of the Chinese state-run newspaper called Global Times, considers enhancing China's nuclear program as being vital to the country's strategic deterrence against the U.S. The increasingly confrontational rhetoric and military maneuvers coming out of the two countries have raised concerns about a potential war. This is coming on the back of the conflict over the Uyghur Muslims. We've got Beijing as one of America's top concerns. Who wrote, he said, we must be prepared for an intense showdown between the China and the U.S. Number of China nuclear warheads must reach the quantity that makes the U.S. elites shiver should they entertain the idea of engaging in a military confrontation with China. Oh my gosh. They are like actually poking. Wow. All right. So who advocated for rapidly increasing the number of commissioned nuclear warheads, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and so on? The editor posted the same comments on Weibo, Chinese social media platform. They've been sparring over a range of issues, the U.S. and China, whose op-ed came one day after Biden announced he instructed the intelligence community to, quote, double down on their efforts. Intelligence community has not ruled out the possibility that COVID came from a lab. Officials have said that the attempted to shift the blame to the United States, citing no evidence. Yeah, Trump was not happy about that when they tried to say it was American soldiers who went over to China and brought the coronavirus. Oh, man. So China's got some nukes. They're going to point our direction, so that's good. All right, so let's take some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We have first in the house, LT13 says, who decides on the redactions? Those redactions in his email are very convenient. So it's the agency that has them. So here, this would be, who is the clearinghouse for the NIAID, right? Whoever submitted the FOIA request, there's a specific set of rules. Wherever the FOIA request went to, the people who are processing that, they've got to comb through it. And it's personal information, really, is what it is. But you're right. You're right. It's the most interesting stuff in these FOIA documents. It's always redacted. We can't ever see the good stuff. We have Sharon Quidney says, you need to go no further than the name Zuckerberg. I suspected that somebody was pulling his strings all the way along and always knew that it was never Trumpers and the Democrats. Now we know. Yeah, a lot of bad actors back there, aren't there? We got LT13 says there should have been an email in there saying, hey, Fauci, don't do a magazine cover with sunglasses on by the pool. Would be a bad look while people are dying. Or maybe I just missed that one. Yeah, honestly, like Fauci turned into this little celebrity, like he's been waiting for this moment his whole life. 15 minutes of fame. We got Farmer's Daughter says, good evening. One of the things I appreciate about you is your willingness to give people the benefit of the doubt. It also annoys the heck out of me. The sources I watched, credible scientists and doctors with no agenda, said what is coming out now and were silenced. Yeah, I know. Also, when in the past history have governments working with the media to control the news and silence the opposition ever been the good guys? Lenin, Hitler, Marx, Castro, Chavez. Yeah, I think you're right, farmer's daughter. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, honestly. And I really do think that people are sort of trying their best. A great lesson on this comes from the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. If you read that, it was written by Dale Carnegie back in the 1930s. One of the most transformational books I've ever read. If you pick it up today, you'll read it and you'll probably think to yourself, this is very simplistic. He's talking about rule number 1 is about never criticize, condemn, or complain. Right? Just don't do that. Don't condemn people. Don't criticize anything. And don't ever complain about anything. And he goes through this rule and he explains why. And he pulls this example out from some mob boss. I forget who it was, back in the 1930s, some mob boss, somebody, killed a bunch of people, stole a bunch of stuff, dealt a bunch of drugs and caused a bunch of mayhem in the 1920s or 30s, whatever. So they arrest that guy and they put him through the trial. And he's done all of these bad things, and they're gonna give him the death penalty or whatever. And right before they execute this guy, they say, "Any last words?" And he says, "I only thought I was trying to do what was best. I was only trying to do my best. I thought what I was doing was right. Something like that. This was the best that I could do." And you go, "What? That's the best you could do? You're like this murdering mob person dealing drugs, like wrecking America. How? That's the best you could do? What kind of piece of garbage are you?" And the point here is that people internalize their own lives to such a degree that they can't see what's happening outside, right? So the point here is that this mob boss person, not that we want to condone or encourage that type of behavior, but the point here is, well, what does condemning that person do? What does criticizing that person do? What does belittling that person or going after that person actually accomplish? Did it do anything? No. We put this guy through a trial. We're going to put him in jail. We're going to kill him. We're going to execute him. He's going to be in custody for the rest of his life. And still, at that last minute, did he finally stand up and say, "You're right, I was wrong. I'm sorry. I should have done better"? No, he didn't. He doubled down and he said, "I tried my best. It's all I knew how to do. It's the only thing I could do." Right? And when I watch that in people, when I see that in people like Dr. Fauci, he may be manipulated. He may be just a little pawn in the grand scheme of things. All of these other people who are doing their very best to control and sort of, herd the sheep that they consider us to be in certain directions. And he's just a small component of that. I think that it would be easy for me to come out here and just rag on Dr. Fauci as a liar and as somebody who is not honest with America, who was intentionally manipulative and all of that stuff. And I think it would be easy to do that. And I want to do that actually a lot of the time, but I try to make it less about kind of the person and more about the bigger picture here. I have a lot of problems with Fauci. I have a lot of problems with anybody in the government that just tells us what we should do, think, and how we should act and how we should feel and how we should live our lives. It is grotesque to me. But when I try to talk about issues rather than people, if I can. I know that sometimes I break that rule and I'm not always good at that, but it's just like, what's the point? If I come out here and blast Dr. Fauci, is that going to change anything? Not really. What I'm more interested in is sort of showing this steady pattern of government incompetence and government malfeasance and just how rotten and awful really the entire structure of the entire system is. It doesn't matter who's in there. It could be Fauci. It could be anybody else. And they're all going to be corrupted. They're all going to be part of the bigger problem. And so I just have sort of that's just my default rule, is that I try to recognize the humanity in the people who are on the other side. I have a bigger problem with the institution than I do with the people behind it. Certainly there are bad people and they need to be called out, but we got to make sure that we're keeping, I think, our humanity in context. I always try to remember that I don't know what other people are seeing or how they are living their lives. And it's not a good idea for me to presume otherwise. Okay, maybe Fauci wakes up every morning and he thinks he's saving lives. Maybe he is. I don't know. But certainly doesn't look like it from these documents. Looks like he was spitting a lot of BS for us all. Sharon Quidney says, so the WHO is owned, or the World Health Organization is owned by the CCP. Then why the heck should we believe one word from them? We shouldn't. And science, don't make me laugh. These are the same folks who don't believe in genetics and biology. It's true, actually. Give me a break. And by the way, most scientific disciplines have been totally co-opted and have become just another part of the propaganda machine. Anybody who says the science is settled is spouting propaganda. Totally agree with that. I don't even know what that means. And that's kind of my point. You know, the science is settled. If it's settled, then you can show me a research paper or the equations that show that this happens every time. It should be repeatable, right? That's kind of the process, is that we can say that we can reproduce this experiment, and we have a hypothesis, a theory, gives us a conclusion, and we can repeat it. If it's settled, if we're debating over the science, it doesn't sound like it's settled at all. Sounds like we're still discussing it. What do they call it? A consensus, right? Scientific consensus. It sounds like that sounds like an opinion to me. So a bunch of scientists have an opinion, not a scientific conclusion or a scientific fact. Okay, it's an opinion, but until it's been proven, don't tell me about your consensus. Joe Snow says he did his best. I think he's mocking me. That's okay. I'm a machine designer and a machinist, and I could have offered better guidance than Fauci at pretty much every point during this pandemic. Gitmo for those who participated in this scam. I know. Fauci's going to, they pulled his book off of all of the retailers. He was on Amazon. He wrote a book. Fauci blew this. He should have written a book earlier. Cuomo wrote a book earlier in the middle of the pandemic. You got to celebrate before it's over, before people look back at what you did and all the people that you're responsible for killing. Sharon Quidney says, when will all these folks wake up and realize that China is not our friend? They are planning to take us over in the next decade or so. As evidence, I offer the threat of nuking us if we ask questions. I know. The state media. Hey, you got questions about Wuhan? How about we cram a couple nuclear warheads up your rear end, America? And we just go, I guess whatever you want to do, China, we're sorry for offending you. Nadarb says, on top of all this, one of the organizations that Flip-Flop runs has a stake in Moderna-Vax. I think it's that one. Not if not, it's one of them for sure. But that's why you never heard Flip-Flop talk about treatment. It was always test, cure, never treat. Money. A lot of money. A lot of money was made here, and a lot of consolidation of wealth, as you'll notice, right? All the billionaires around the world, they all got a lot richer. All the tech gurus, the people who are sort of set up with the infrastructure to handle a pandemic, they're all okay. But the people who are more middle class, the servers, the plumbers, the people who are out there building houses, digging ditches like I did, it was something that you're out of luck. Sorry, you're on your own now for a certain period of time, and there's a big segment of this country that I feel like has been forgotten about in the last 12 months. Boxy Punk Chick is here. She says, why is it that when they had all the podcasts about studying microbiology for viruses, then why would they turn around and deny it? To me, that means they are guilty of the leak. They claim it was for making vaccines for preparedness. Yet, remember how they said Trump was anti-science, yet they made sure he put money into the vaccines. Then Biden campaigns as pro-science. Yeah, so the gain of function research was intended, allegedly, to, not make weapons or anything that would be harmful to humans, but it was just so that we could see what the natural progression of the viruses looked like. So we could anticipate the next deadly virus so that we could start preparing vaccines for that. There was a Mission Impossible movie about this. I think it was Mission Impossible 2. Terrible. But it was, they talked about that. Tom Cruise is trying to save the world by getting the vaccine or whatever. Patriot Musk says, the issue with claiming the virus originated from a bat would only make sense if you found several other bats that carry the same virus. If you don't find that, then one can assume that it was a freak accident, that one bat found its way to a human to transmit the virus, unless a genetically engineered virus inserted into a bat was released into the public, which is more plausible. Yeah, so yes, that would be more plausible if they genetically engineered a virus, put it into a bat, and then release the bat. If you read the Nicolas Wade article, Patriot, you'll see, and I cover this in the video, two things here that he talks about. He talks about a total of 4 factors, and he goes through 4 factors, and then in my video, I just put a check in one of the 2 boxes. He goes through factor 1, geography. We talk about geography. What does the geographical analysis tell us? Lab, escape, natural origin. Which one? Well, the geography, according to Nicolas Wade, would show that it's a lab leak because all of this originated in Wuhan. If this came from a bat out of a cave in China, there was a location that I covered in the video. I forget the name of it, but there are a bunch of caves sort of in the southwest part of China, and it's about 1,500 miles away from Wuhan. So if the virus originated there in bats, it would have jumped to a human population somehow through a host. Some sort of transmission would happen there, and you'd be able to identify people infected with coronavirus near that area geographically, not 1,500 miles away in Wuhan. So how did the virus somehow come from the caves in China, 1,500 miles southwest of Wuhan, magically appear in Wuhan, infect a bunch of people, and then not leave any traces in the caves? How does that work? So if you analyze all the factors, it looks pretty clear to Nicolas Wade and myself that the lab escape theory has a lot of merit. Jeremy Matridas in the house says, information is so readily available and communication is nearly instant. It makes my head explode when I see people trying to make claims or denials contrary to the information currently available. The media, etc., make themselves look like morons when they try to deny the truth. I think that, yeah. They also end up later admitting the previously denied information, which makes them look even worse. I'm surprised anyone pays attention to the media anymore. I agree with you completely on this, Jeremy. And it's so, it's so fun. It's not as enjoyable as it should be, because what we do is we move so fast as people. I'm reading another book from Nicholas Nassim Taleb. And it's called, what book is it? He's got 4 of them. I think I'm in the one called Fooled by Randomness. No, it's Black Swan. It's the Black Swan book. In it, he talks about the triplet of opacity. And he's talking about this concept that history is opaque. So when we look back, historically speaking, it doesn't matter when it is. We can look back to the Civil War. We can look back to, the Roman era when Jesus was walking the planet, or we can look back 6 months ago. History is opaque. We can only see what's on the outer shell of that wall. We can't see beyond the wall. We can't see what the process was for coming up with the final conclusion. We only see the conclusion, historically speaking. So when we look backwards, we're only sort of seeing kind of what we want to see. We're only sort of seeing what history has told us that we can see. And a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, we just kind of forget about, just generally, naturally speaking. So we have all of these journalists and all of these people now who are coming out and saying, wow, this Wuhan lab escape theory, it's got some merit to it, doesn't it? And you go back on their timeline 1 year ago on Twitter, they were calling people conspiracy theorists and whack jobs. And they were condemning Ted Cruz for even suggesting a lab leak hypothesis. And you're saying, how do these people who are in the journalism business, how do they sleep at night? Waking up and not recognizing that their position 1 year ago was completely different than it is today. And it's because it's sort of a combination of that history is opaque, plus that condemnation, criticism, and complaining rule from Dale Carnegie kind of mashed together. You can go after them, but they're just going to say, well, I just did the best I could with the information that I had, and I did nothing wrong. Meanwhile, those of us who are not on that side of that error, or that we would call an analytical mistake, we say, yeah, but we were right and you were wrong. And they say, well, I was acting on the information that I had. And we say, well, so were we. And so we just have this sort of round and around we go. And the thing that stands out to me is the pattern here about how often the media is wrong, and how often it feels like to me that they are just actually dishonest, like they've got an agenda. I don't watch any of it anymore. I mean, I don't even have cable for that reason, or spend almost any time watching it, because it is that dishonest, in my opinion. We have Farmer's Daughter says that there are vaccine creators coming forward saying that they have been working unsuccessfully at creating a SARS-CoV vaccine for 20 years. Neither has an mRNA vaccine been tested on humans for a virus. I will post the sources here. That's from Farmer's Daughter, so she's going to post some stuff over up at Locals, watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We have Nadarb says, these guys like Daszak and Fauci have been doing this type of work longer than I have been alive, so they know the right procedures, they know what the scientific method is, so I do not buy that they were mistaken or confused, or it was some kind, because this is a new thing, they lied and people died, lock them up. Yeah, that's the other point of this, is they knew better. These are the most prestigious people. These are the people that we put in charge of these situations. They know what they were doing. Don't act like this is just, look, if you put me in charge and I'm like, I don't know, wear a mask. Sounds good. Okay, this is Dr. Fauci. Been doing it since 1984, 36 years, long time. Farmer's Daughter says, I have read it. Great book. Guess it didn't take. No, I really appreciate you. We need people like you to keep people like me in check. I do just laugh a lot at the absurdity. It is absurd, and don't get me wrong, Farmer's Daughter. There are times I want to get on here and just go, all right, let me tell you what I really think about Dr. Fauci. Okay, brace yourselves. And I'm not going to do that. It would be therapeutic. It would feel good, but it's not, it's not really what I want this show to be. And it's honestly, it might feel great. A lot of the times people like to engage in politics because it just feels good. You just want to be mad at something, and politics is very easy to get mad at somebody. You just open up the news and you go, wow, that's horrible. I can't wait to just rant and rave about that. And I'm just going to let myself get really angry about it because it almost feels good. And so I know that, and as somebody that comes on this show every day, I know I have to be cognizant of that, because sometimes, I kind of go that direction a little bit. And so when I see a story like Fauci or like Kamala, we're going to talk about next, I try to pace myself a little bit. So we got one more question here from Jack Sparrow. Says, you seem to think Mark Zuckerberg's email was a nothing burger. Does it not show Facebook coordinating with the government on messaging? And would it not give First Amendment claims to people who were censored on Facebook, as Facebook was acting in coordination with the government? So, Jack, I do think that it is a problem that we have this government tech complex, or this government media complex, or this government military complex. I really don't like the idea that the government is so in bed with all of these major institutions. And it's not like Zuckerberg is just, a baker who just, hey, or a pizza delivery guy. We got some extra pizzas we can go deliver to the vaccine workers down there. Care for that? No, right? This is somebody who says, hey, I've got an audience of 250 million Americans and a billion people. What do you need from me? And so, I understand that there is a real danger there, and I really do not like the coziness of that relationship. I don't like the idea that we have anybody in this country that can just sort of flip a couple switches and shift the entire conversation. I mean, that's basically the power that Zuckerberg has, which is why every time I get on here about the senators calling Zuckerberg into the Senate and asking him hard questions, the whole thing is just a big fraud, because we know who really has the power here. Zuckerberg does, and he just demonstrated it by telling Fauci, I can literally shift minds of a significant portion of the American population. We're already working on it. It's going to be done in 48 hours, right? That's real power. And the fact that he's sort of, interfacing with the government that closely to change people's opinions or to shift the narrative, I have a lot of issues with that. So I'm not really commenting on that. I think I'm more commenting on the fact that he just sends what I would consider to be a relatively benign email on its own, right? That email on its own kind of stands by itself. Now, if Zuckerberg is doing this, which I suspect he is, with all other different pillars of our government, I got a big problem with that. And there's a lot going on there. We saw how much money he gave during the elections. We saw how much funding he supported with all of these different very, very convenient battleground states about, ballot collections and all sorts of stuff. We've covered that in depth. The Chan Zuckerberg initiative, which donated like $400 million running elections around the country. It's a huge problem. I have a huge problem with Facebook and these big tech companies and how close they are in bed with our government. I think it's a huge problem. When I was commenting on Zuckerberg's email, it was just that email standing on its own. But I absolutely understand your point that this is a little bit too uncomfortable for me. We have a private CEO of a big company that we all know has very, very close proximity to the federal government in many ways, coordinating with the government about managing American response to the pandemic. It's scary when that is happening. So I have a problem with that, Jack.